Hi, welcome back to the Woodshop Nerdery. In this video, I'm going to make some window boxes out of cedar to hang under the barn sashes I made for the shed. Since I'm going to be staining these with the same Cabot new cedar color that I stained the rest of the trim with, I'm going to go ahead and take a risk and experiment with some new techniques. The technique I'm going to try this time are sliding dovetails. Off camera, I've already milled up the component parts for the window boxes. This time, I'm not working from a project plan. I'm simply constructing the window boxes to match the dimensions of this planter box liner I bought from Menards. Even with two workpieces stacked on top of each other, the boards are not wide enough to match the dimensions of the planter box liner, so I need to add a thin strip to extend the height. I decide to add that strip between the two wider boards and chamfer the edges as a design detail. I've just recently become a fan of the Biscuit joiner. I know I'm a little late to the party, but I had been using dowels for everything. I think I'll keep using dowels for anything involving end grain for strength, but for edge-to-edge gluing, I'm really liking this Biscuit cutter. Even with the extra setup time on the Shopsmith, this process is still much faster than drilling individual dowel holes. Notice that I have the Biscuit joiner rotated about 40 degrees to the table. This tip comes from Scott Markwood of mygrowthrings.com. Scott shares his expert level knowledge regarding Shopsmith tools and general woodworking topics on his YouTube channel. I'll link to his channel in the video's description. With the Biscuit slots cut, I now need to chamfer the edges. To get in as much practice as possible, I'm going to use the over-table routing system for my Shopsmith. Here I have the dust collection hose connected to the bottom of the shaper insert with a starting pin installed. From here, it's just a standard exercise in applying glue, adding the biscuits, and clamping. While the glue is drying, I'm going to go ahead and cut the French cleat I need for the back of the planter box. The first step in creating the sliding dovetails was to create a regular dado to clear out most of the material before coming back and making the dovetail slot. I set up to make that dado. First, I set a rough placement of the fence. Second, I fine-tuned the alignment of the straight cutting bit to the layout mark using the table height adjustment. Third, I extend the quill so the straight cut bit is level with the top of the workpiece. Fourth, I set the quill feed stop to 1/2 inch, the final depth of the dado. I'll make the dado in two 1/4 inch passes. So fifth, I extend the quill an additional 1/4 inch and lock it down. Finally, I power up the machine and begin cutting the dados. The dust collector hose doesn't work very well in this arrangement, so I change the arrangement of the hose and things work a lot better. To prepare for the final pass, I extend the quill an additional 1/4 inch. I switch over to a 1/4 inch straight cutting bit to make the bottom slots to receive the bottom slats of the planter box. I sneak the bit down into the dado made previously and run the workpiece along the fence to make the slot. I have to say I much prefer using the over-table routing with the fence and the featherboard hold down. I think that's the arrangement I'll use going forward. With the dados and grooves cut, I can now add the dovetail shoulders to the dados.
I'll be using the over-table routing system again, this time with the feather board installed on the quill shaft. This will help keep the piece held down to the table while the workpiece is passing through the router bit. For the inside shoulders, I feed the workpiece from left to right. This is so I'm feeding the workpiece into the rotation of the router bit. For the outside shoulders of the dado slots, I need to feed the piece from right to left, again to account for the rotation of the router bit. With all the dovetail slots cut, I move on to cutting the dovetail tenons on the side pieces. I come up with a technique for setting the depth of the tenon by using the table extension connector tube as a depth stop. Here, the tube is even with the end of the router bit, so if I extend the quill by 1/2 inch, I'll know that the depth of my tenon is 1/2 inch. I've been struggling with splintering and tear out the entire time on this very dry reclaimed cedar. To help with the tear out, I'm going to try a scoring pass. To do that, I add a stop collar to the table height adjustment tubes and lower the table just a little bit, which has the effect of raising the router bit relative to the workpiece. I'll make a light scoring pass, then raise the table to full height to make the final pass. This scoring pass technique doesn't really help with the tear out too much, but I need to move on to making the bottom slats for the planter box. Since I created a 1/2 inch slot, I need the slats to have a 1/2 inch tenon on the end. There's a little bit of tear out to deal with, but all in all, not a bad way to make an end tenon.
Well, I've run into a pretty big problem. I've made my dovetail tenons too small. As it turns out, the original mistake occurred when I was cutting the groove for the sliding dovetail. Somehow, somewhere, my miter gauge became out of square. So when I cut the opposite shoulder of the dovetail groove, it was actually angled in comparison to the other shoulder. Let me show you what I mean about the tapered dovetail dado.
I use the miter set system to set the angles on my miter gauge. I've installed a Sharpie marker in the drill chuck for the Shopsmith. If my miter gauge is square, I should be able to flip the miter gauge to the opposite side of the table and retrace that same line with no deviation. So there you go. That means my miter gauge is square. But let me put my miter gauge out of square to demonstrate how I think I ended up with the tapered dovetail groove.
I didn't realize it, so when fitting my dovetail tenons, I kept making the tenons smaller and smaller so that they would fit until ultimately they were too small. So this makes assembly quite a bit more complex. I've decided to use epoxy as a gap filler to restore some of the strength to the planter boxes.
Finally, the glue up stage. Here I'm mixing up one of many batches of epoxy to fill all the gaps and mistakes in this project. Even though wood glue is much easier to work with, these joints are just so poor that there isn't enough wood to wood contact to get any strength out of that wood glue. The bottom slats are the only cross-grain connection in this project. So I just add one nail in the center just in case wood movement becomes a problem. The epoxy did a nice job filling all the gaps in the joints, but now I need to shave off the excess with a chisel. I get it as flush as possible with the chisel before hitting it with the sander. Boy, I can't tell you how glad I am to be painting this project. There were several times I thought this was going to end up in the trash can. As frustrating as it was, I have to remember that when I started woodworking, all my projects went this way, because I was learning everything new. I think it just goes with the territory when you're trying to learn something new and expand your skills. And here's the result. I'm entirely happy with these, even if the process of building them was somewhat of a challenge. That's it. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you feel I've earned it.